Every day, we're going to examine ourselves. Every day, I'm going to examine myself. I'm taking a personal inventory and looking at myself. Where am I at? We're going to engage with God so that we can improve our conscious contact with Him. We want to equip people to get into the same relationship with God that we do, that they can be free from their struggles. Examine myself, engage with God, and equip others. And we'll begin to see that our whole life is changing because of this whole thing that's going on there. Every one of us has probably had somebody along the way that has crossed paths with us that has told us about their struggle, their addiction, or whatever it is that they had been involved in that had gotten them off track in life. And then that person has shared with us a place or perhaps a person that we could go to look for help. And so, like in my own case, I can tell you several people who, when I was in the midst of my addiction to drugs and alcohol, primarily alcohol is what was my primary drug of choice, and many people who had found healing from that same struggle had approached me and said, I want to tell you about a group that you can go to, or I want to tell you about a person that I need to get connected with. And so it was because of those people that I ended up taking a chance and going to a rehab. It was because of some of those people that I found out later that I began to come to Celebrate Recovery, that I began to get this vision and idea to help start a recovery ministry. And so it was all because of those people who had walked through this path. And so tonight, we're finishing up this series, the 12 steps, climbing the ladder of recovery. And as most of you know, I mean, because of these ladders, we started out and we've been 6 weeks into this, and we had this small ladder, simply 3 steps, basically, that we were kind of kicking off with. And if you were a visual person, you know that we kind of stair-stepped our way through and worked through here. And at the very beginning, there may have been all this tension of, will I ever even get through the 12 steps? And so now, you know, we're finishing up and we see this tall ladder here, and we really, if we've been following through with this, and if we've been really doing the idea of what these people that started the Alcoholics Anonymous had done, then we should be finding some freedom from our struggle already. And so, you know, when we began those, there were a lot of things that we were having to do, and then we got in the middle of them. There were a lot of tough steps, and then we're getting here tonight, and there's 3 steps left, and we're going to be covering step 10, step 11, and step 12. And you might be thinking, oh my goodness, how in the world are we going to cram 3 steps into this last teaching? And I have good news, because really, and this is kind of the first time that I've really pictured this is not just, okay, we're going to do 3 steps so we can clean up these series, because if I begin to read through what those founders of Alcoholics Anonymous had set out in the big book, and then how I've applied these spiritual principles in my life, and I look at these last 3 steps, and I could see that this is something I do every day. And so hopefully you're going to see that this is something you can do too, and every day. And you probably, like I said, you can remember a person that's invited you to be here, and probably every person in this room is because somebody has shared their story with you. And that's what a lot of this last step and 10th and 11th is about. And so what I want to assure us of is that as we get to the end of this, you know, there is hope. Because a lot of times there's that tension of, okay, I'm coming to the end of a group. You may have been in a small group study. I've done a lot of small group studies, and you've got so many chapters you're dealing with. Or if you've been in a 12-step study, and then you're getting toward the end of it, and what happened next? And there can be that tension. Or there can be seasons in life where you spend a lot of time with people, and then there's that tension of you're nearing the end. Like, I know whenever I went to rehab, that there was that tension of when I was there, that last 2 or 3 days, that like, am I really going to make it? Am I really, when I get out of here, everything that I've experienced for this season of time, is it going to stick? And, if you've been in jail, and been a lot of time you've spent, a lot of time you've pursued your healing and followed a lot of classes in the jail to try to get clean. And then there comes that tension of when you're going to be released. There's the excitement of it, but is it going to stick to things that I've learned? And maybe the people that we've been close to through those times, we're not even sure if we're going to be in touch with them anymore. And so the whole idea here is that we're going to lay out in these last 3 steps that there is hope. And a lot of times those groups, they'll make promises. Well, let's start another group because we want to really recreate what happened here. Or we're going to have maybe a reunion group so that we'll know, we can get together once in a while and say, what's your progress? And all those things are good, but as these 12 steps finish up, what we're going to see is that these guys that set this program up that they laid out in the big book called Alcoholics Anonymous, or whatever your struggle is, sexual addiction, or drugs, any of those things, they laid out this idea that really what I believe came together in these last 3 steps. And one thing that is fascinating to me is that as I've finished this up is I've heard a lot of people in a lot of groups that I've went to, AA meetings when I was still going to a lot of those different type meetings, and people would say, I have a sponsor, accountability partner, and they would say, you got to work those first 3 steps every day. Every day you've got to work those first 3 steps. And so, I kind of took that to heart because they had a lot more wisdom than I did. But I would challenge us to think about that idea from the standpoint that if you're familiar with the first 3 steps, I would kind of summarize them like this. Step 1, we realize we're powerless. I can't do anything. I've reached the point where I am totally powerless, and whatever this was that had control of me, I can't do anything. And then step 2, we decided to buy in and go the spiritual route and accept God as our path of recovery. And then step 3, we took that a step further with this whole spiritual thing, and we gave everything we had to God, and we said, I'm turning my whole life and my will and everything over to you. And all that was good. But see, here's the thing that I think is fascinating as we get into these last 3 steps that we're going to see. All those first 9 steps are done. We've already realized that we were powerless over this thing that controlled us. We've already decided that we're going to give God a chance, and we've already decided that we're going to give everything over to Him, our lives and our will and everything. And so many people would say, yeah, I give it over to Him, but I took it back. Well, that came in later steps. But see, the idea, and what I think may be the false belief system of some of the folks that may have said that, is that if I'm always working those first 3 steps, when am I ever going to get through the steps? When am I going to really learn what those 12 steps had for me and move on with the rest of my life? Because if I'm still doing 1, 2, and 3, what about 4 through 12? When will I ever get there? And so what I want to do is I want to leave us tonight. As we leave here, we're going to walk through this process of these last 3 steps. And I'm going to talk about 3 steps, but I'm going to talk about one big idea that's laid out in these 3 steps that I think we can remember. And I'm going to challenge every one of us. I'm going to go ahead and tell you now what this whole teaching is about. When we get to the end, these last 3 steps, I'm going to introduce the idea that perhaps we need to work these last 3 steps every day. And not that we need to work them so that God would be happy with us or that God would be pleased with us, but because we're going to see that it was fascinating that what these writers came up with in the big book, I believe it was in 1930 that they came out with this. What they came up with in these ideas, we're going to see that Jesus and a lot of the other people way thousands of years ago, they had these same ideas going on. So let's dive in here, and you should have a handout, and if you're listening online or maybe in your car or whatever, I just want to point out that you can go to our website, celebratingfreedom.org, and you can click on handouts, and you can download these teaching notes and follow right along with what we're doing. And I also would hope that if you have been following along in this teaching, that you took the challenge early on or maybe midway, but at least that you decided that you were going to read through the 12-step devotional in the Life Recovery Bible, because that's a powerful way to get whole new ideas from what we believe that God said to people that would help us get through these struggles. And so I'm going to read through these here and just follow along, and then we'll talk about them. Step 10 said that we continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. And so, see, we're going to remember, this is going to be real easy. You've heard of AAA, to get your car fixed and all that. So tonight we're kind of talking about Triple E. We're going to make this easy to remember, Triple E. And so we continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. We do that on a daily basis. See, there's that whole idea I was talking about. This is something that we can do every day. And so what this whole step boils down to is this one word, I believe, examine. Every day we're going to examine ourselves. Every day I'm going to examine myself. I'm taking a personal inventory and looking at myself. Where am I at? And see, that whole word examine, it means to make an impact or scrutinize, take a look at, inspect myself, not impact, but take a look at what's inside of me, what may have happened today. And see, I can remember this. I didn't know, that was step 10 or whatever. But when I was in rehab, we had this thing that we did every night. We stayed together in an apartment. There were 4 of us, and then we'd done our work through the day. And every night we would get in our group, and everybody that was in our pod from the other neighboring apartments, we would get together, and we would all sit around, and we would talk about what did our day look like? And, what were the victories, and what were the successes? And what were the things that I struggled with? And how were those character flaws playing out in me? Or what was the good things that came out? And so, even though that we didn't necessarily use those words, this is step 10. This is what it's talking about. That we took an honest look at ourselves every day and we brought those things out. And see, we did that whole step back in step 4 where we took a very in-depth inventory and then we just kind of got all that stuff out. We took out the trash. We cleaned house. And so we begin to do this on a daily basis. And see, this was not even a new idea to these writers of the big book because, we spent one teaching talking about, Jesus said that. He said, if you're in the temple and you're offering your gift and you realize somebody has something against you, then you need to leave it. You need to go. And so, see, that idea was unique to Jesus. He was already telling the people, when it comes to mind, you need to deal with it. So every day we need to be examining ourselves. Let's say that together. Examine myself. Examine myself. That's one thing we want to do, and we'll be kind of going along with this idea of step 10. And then step 11 says this. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Prayer and meditation, trying to improve our conscious contact with God. And see, I think that's one of the key words there. I mean, we know that God exists. I mean, we already went through that. I mean, we realized that we needed God and we turned everything over to Him in some of those early steps. But for many of us, as we've described along the way, God is a very distant person. Or we may have this idea that we still can't even talk to God. But see, this whole step is about this idea of engaging with God. That's going to be our word, our second E. We're going to engage with God so that we can improve our conscious contact with Him. And so, see, every day, that's going to look different for everybody else. And so this is where I would really challenge you here, that how are we going to engage with God? How am I going to engage with God? How am I going to improve my conscious contact with God? And so, for everybody, it's going to look different. And this is where we want to be careful because we don't want to come up with some formula. Because every time a formula breaks down, then as somebody that's a healing process or addicted or whatever, then we just kind of throw in the towel. We say the whole God thing didn't work. And so, see, what is my method for engaging? And see, it may change over time. Like when I first began to get onto this idea that I need to engage with God, I mean, I've shared with you before that I journaled. I wrote down my thoughts, and I wasn't sure. Is that God? And it was just in my head, so I'd write it down. And so then if that thought kept repeating and it lined up with the things I'd been learning about God, I began to realize that's God. And so I was seeking through journaling to improve my conscious contact with God. And see, I went to the other extreme as well because I set up so many rules and so many what I would call fail-safe plans that it couldn't fail. And guess what? It failed. And this particular thing I'm talking about, I didn't relapse, but see, I felt like at one point that I was such an OC, such a structured person that I needed to have something in place everywhere I went. So I had a variety of different devotional books that, by golly, I was going to do a devotion every day. and I couldn't get up early enough to do it, or let me say I just was too lazy to get up early enough to do it. And so I'd put a devotion in my office, I'd put one in my truck, I'd put one in my bedroom, I'd put one in the living room, I'd put one wherever I thought I needed to be. And see, now it's the same thing I do with eyeglasses. I have to have reading glasses, so I just go ahead and buy half a dozen pair. And I put them everywhere I think I'll be, and so when I need them, they're there. And so see, I would put those things, those devotions, everywhere, and so that my goal was to improve my conscious contact with God by reading as many devotions as I could read. And so the problem with that is I'm an OC person, and, devotions, they should go in order, right? I mean, you would think they should go in order. At least that's what I think. And so if I got behind a day or two on one because maybe I hadn't been to that location, you can see where that's going, right? I mean, maybe I'm in my office, but then I haven't been somewhere else, and then I forgot. And so I'm 1 day behind here, and I'm 3 days behind there, and I'm 4 days behind there. And so instead of just picking up and continuing to read, guess what I did? I gave up. And so, see, in my mind, I still wasn't engaging with God because I was still on I need to work to please God. And so I was failing in staying in touch with God because I wasn't doing it for the way I had set it up. I was, just all out of whack there. And so then later in life, things began to change. And, I was living by myself at the time from the divorce. And so I just began to read my Bible at night and journal and take things like that. And then my daughter came to live with me, and that kind of went out the window for a while. I had to readjust my schedule. And then I began to go to church a whole lot more than I used to. And the particular church I was going to, Celebration, they had 3 services, and Saturday night service and 2 Sunday morning services. And so I thought, I need to get all I can get. And so I would come on Saturday night, but then I would come on Sunday morning to the first service, and I'd stay for the second service. And they were all 3 the same service. But see, I thought I need to get as much of God as I can get. And with the dead brain cells and all from all the years of abuse, I couldn't always grasp it. And I remember a time the pastor came up to me, and he said, "You realize that these are all 3 the same service? I've been seeing you here at all 3 services." And I said, "Yeah, I realize that. This is the best place for me to be, and I need all I can get right now." And so he was, "Yeah, okay, well, that's good. I'm glad you're here." And so that was another thing that I set up that I did for myself, and then I began to jump into small groups. And see, you probably have your own story, or you may even be thinking, what am I going to do to improve my conscious contact with God? Because I've heard that you got to pray so many hours a day, and I got to get up early in the morning, and then I have to do this at night. Well, maybe if that works for you. But see, the thing we learn, that because we have the Holy Spirit live in us, when, Jesus promised would come, is we can communicate with God all day long. And so see, over time, my conscious contact with God began to be just that. Because I had this false idea that, if you weren't praying and had your hands or you're on your knees or in a certain posture, that God really didn't just hear you. I mean, he may just say, "What was that?" But if you weren't really in the right position, then maybe he didn't hear us at all. And so as I began to learn more and more and more from pursuing God and the conscious contact with him, I just talked to God all day long. And so now, I don't do the morning devotion thing. I don't do the night devotion thing, but we've developed this little system in our home where we do get together every morning, and we do get together at night, and we pray and we thank God, and we just talk to him. And, we do it a lot of times with our eyes closed, and we do it a lot of times with our eyes open, and we do it in our pajamas, and we do it on the couch, and we do it in the bed, and we talk to God in all of its forms. And a lot of times we'll be walking through the house and we'll say, "God, help us. Lord, we need help with this. Will you give us direction?" And I'm not trying to just say, do whatever you want to do, but you're going to have to find out what works for you. And as your conscious contact with God improves, you're going to realize that it's more than just, "Oh man, I forgot to pray." That's where we don't want to get to, is, "Oh my goodness, I forgot to pray." We want to get to that point that our conscious contact with God is that I'm just with God all the time. We're always having this conversation. He knows, when I mess up, and he knows all these other things. I've told a story here before where there was a guy that he has a lot of time because he doesn't work anymore. And he told me that, it was just amazing for him that he got to spend 2 to 3 hours with God every morning early. And every day he got to do that. And I thought, that's just absolutely wonderful. And that was his thing that had become kind of a ritual to him, if you will, that he did every morning religiously. And so one day I came in contact with him, and he was telling me how this had been the worst day he had ever had. And he said, and I've traced it back, and I didn't have that time with God this morning. And so my day just went all to pieces. And I said, I am so sorry to hear that. And so later on, I don't know, weeks or months later, I ran into him again, and he was just on top of the world. And he said, this has been absolutely the best day I have probably ever had, that I can't remember in such a long time. What a great day this has been. And I said, wow, that's great. So you had that 3 or 4 hours with God this morning. It made all the difference. And it got really silent. And he thought, and he said, no, actually I didn't. But see, he had this moment where he realized that his performance and his days were not based on whether he had 3 hours with God on that particular morning of that particular day. See, God doesn't punish us based on whether we've talked to him enough or prayed enough or studied enough or whatever. He wants a constant communication with us. And that, we got to remember, like we talked about last week, that's why we turned our lives and our wills over to him. So the second thing we're doing with step 12 is what? Engage. So examine myself, engage with God continually. And then we get to step 12. Having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And so here what we want to do in our third E is equip. We want to equip people, and you can find a definition for that. It says prepare somebody to accomplish something. Think about that. We want to equip people to get into the same relationship with God that we do, that they can be free from their struggles. And so this 3-part thing is what we're focusing on here. Examine, engage, equip. Let's say that. Examine, engage, equip. Every day, if we would just look at this whole idea, not to become religious about it, but examine myself. Take a look. What's going on? Engage with God and equip others. I wonder how our whole life would change if we could do those 3 things. You see what I'm saying? Do you think that would make a difference in our life if we would do that? And see, many times we don't want to be tied to, oh my goodness, what was that second E, or what was that first E, or what was that third E? Because if we actually look back on our day, and if I were to ask you tonight, or you were to ask me, then I could probably say that at some point today I was examining myself. I wasn't making a formal point and say, okay, let's talk about what you've been doing today, Roger. And some of those things were really kind of ugly. But you did some good ones over here, and we're going to kind of sort them all out. That's not what I'm talking about. But I have probably today, I could already tell you that I've already been convicted of, there's something right there that you need to take a look at. And see, usually we don't even have to have a word. We don't have to have a formal proposal to sit down and examine ourselves. Let's face it. I know when I hurt somebody's feelings. I know when I say a harsh word. I know when I look at something I shouldn't have looked at. I know if I flirted with somebody and I didn't need to do that. I know if I, did this or that or the other that may eventually fuel my addiction to recur. I know those things. And chances are you do too. You don't have to say, oh my goodness, did I examine myself? You know, right? You know if you hurt somebody's feelings. You know that whatever your particular struggle is, that you got way too close to that. And when do we know that? We typically know it immediately. And see, that's what the conscious contact with God is about. It lets us know something immediately. See, like Jesus, if you hear that and you're at the altar and you remember that, then go. We know. Why did that person need to do it then that Jesus was talking to? He knew something came to his mind. You need to go resolve this. And so, see, this is not a new idea. We know these things when they come to mind. And so if we realize that this is a good practice to live by, then our whole life will change. And many times as a result of our life changing, other people's life may change. Because they'll see a difference in us, and then they may want to say, what brought that on? And look, I want to read you this quote from the Big Book is they were wrapping up this last chapter of talking about how to work through these steps. And look at what they said here. Burn the idea into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is that he trusts in God and clean house. Burn the idea into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is that he trusts in God and clean house. And see, that's the whole idea, to let other people know that, no matter what you've been through, God can bring you through this. He has an answer. And so this is what they're doing here through these last 3 steps. They're working this all out, and we see these things happening in our life every day, whether we even recognize it was a step. It's like I said, there may be that tension of, what do I do with all this? And this is what I'm suggesting that we take away from here tonight. What is it? What are we taking away? Examine, engage, equip. Examine, engage, equip. Examine myself, engage with God, and equip others. And we'll begin to see that our whole life is changing because of this whole thing that's going on there. And see, not only, like I said, did the folks that wrote the Big Book have something to say about this, but see, this same idea was modeled in Jesus' time. Over 2,000 years ago, this was modeled in Jesus' time and even before that. And so I want us to look at this one story, and you hear me talk about this because it's another one of my favorite stories that it models this whole thing. As a matter of fact, this story models really all the 12 steps in one conversation that Jesus had. Jesus had this conversation. It's found in John chapter 4, and if you're following in the Life Recovery Bible, it's page 1346. But just to kind of set the story up, and then we'll read how it all played out. But, we talked about this, I believe, in one of the step teaching. But Jesus encountered this Samaritan woman at the well, and they were not even supposed to talk. I mean, Jesus was a Jew. He wasn't even supposed to talk to Samaritans, and much less that, even women. And so, see, he went up and began to have a conversation with her. He asked her for a drink of water. And so he already was engaged with her, and then she began to have a conversation with him. And so, see, we believe that, following God, that Jesus is God. And so what was she doing having that conversation with him? What was she doing? She was engaging with God. She didn't really realize it was God. She didn't have a full understanding of who God even was. And she was really confused that he would even talk to her. And see, that's how we feel a lot of times, that, God would really talk to me. I mean, we're kind of like Samaritans at times, right? I mean, we don't think God wants to have anything to do with us because we got all our stuff. And so, see, she began to engage with Jesus, and so she was right there. And so they began to have this conversation, and she gave him a drink of water. They kept having a talk, and then he said, well, there's probably another whole way that you can go and not have this thirst for all these things of life. She said, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And so she basically had done one of the first few steps that she, gave her life to God right there. Right there in just a moment, he had that conversation with her. She engaged, and then she took action on it. And so she said, I want what you got. Let me have it. And so Jesus gave it to her. The whole, you're going to be free. You're not going to be thirsting for all these foul things anymore. And so then he asked her this interesting question after all that. I mean, they were still talking, and, John chapter 4, and he said this to her. He said, go and get your husband, Jesus told her. I don't have a husband, the woman replied. And Jesus said, you're right, you don't have a husband. For you've had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the one you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth. And so see, that's interesting in following along with these whole 3 ideas we're talking about. Examine myself, engage with God, and equip others. Because see, she had already decided, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. She had already decided that. It's kind of the equivalent of like we did on step 1 and 2. Yeah, I can't do it, and so I'm going to follow you, God, and I'm all in. I'm giving my life and will over to you. She was already there. But then this thing came up about her past. After, you could say, we became a Christian. Here came this whole thing. It was kind of like examine, right? And Jesus said, yeah, you're right. You don't have a husband. And not only that, you kind of got 5. I don't know. Why would he ask her that question? I have no idea. But don't you find that an interesting question? I mean, there's not anything that in the story there that implied that, and so he just asked that. But see, I think it's interesting that as she was engaging with God, he was causing an examination of herself to be going on. And see, that happens with us all the time. I mean, we may be talking to God, and then there's that person, or there's this thing that I think is revealed to me. And so let's read on here. We're going to jump down a little bit. And it says, the woman left her water jar beside the well, and she ran back to the village, telling everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? So the people came streaming from the village to see him. Many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, he told me everything I ever did. And so see, what was she doing there? I mean, she was going out to equip others. She left what she was doing, and she couldn't just get past this whole idea that I've dealt with my stuff, and she went to equip others. And she went and told them, and she not only told the other people, I want to help you get equipped. You need to come see Jesus. But she told them about, the whole being examined, that he told me everything I ever knew. And so she shared that with somebody. And see, this is where I believe these 3 steps, really, just in this whole story right here, they really connect and just go together. Because it's not just like, okay, I need to examine myself, and then I need to engage with God, and then I need to equip others, and I got to work these steps, and I'm finished with 12 steps, and I'm done with all that. No, I mean, this is like a cycle that can go in any direction. These 3 things, these 3 ideas, examine, engage, and equip, they're interrelated. One can be triggered from the other. Just like we see here. She was engaged with God, and then it caused her to examine herself, and she told the truth. She was honest with herself. See, that's powerful. Because a lot of times, I mean, we went through that in the whole denial teaching. We know things about ourselves, but we don't necessarily want to admit them. And see, the woman, it said, she replied, and Jesus said, you're right. And he said, you certainly spoke the truth. And so see, when she examined herself and was confronted by engaging with God, then she admitted the truth, and it caused a change in her life. And see, that's what I think these whole ideas of examine, engage, and equip, they will cause a life change in us that will be seen by others. It will change our whole outlook on life. I mean, you see it just and hear it in what I'm talking about. My whole life has changed. I mean, it was not on my radar to become a recovery teacher or a teacher on healing. That was not on my radar, but my whole life has changed because of this whole idea of engaging with God. And then as he causes me to examine myself, then I'm able to say, yeah, that's right. And there's periods that, we just put it off and we don't want to believe it and don't want to believe it's true. But it comes through that engaging with God that these things come out. And see, not only that are they intertwined that way, but they can be intertwined in another different direction. See, she was engaged with him, and it caused her to want to go help equip other people. And so through that engaging with God, she probably somewhere in there, she had this idea that, man, I've got to go tell these other people about that. And she did. She acted on it. And she went and she told these other people, and it said they all came back. And I really encourage you to read that whole story there in John, because, the whole thing is just a total picture of recovery. And the reason that I love this story so much is not only just because it proves these principles of examining ourselves, engaging with others, and engaging with God and equipping others, but because this was done in all one setting. And see, that's the whole idea that we started with there, that in a day's time, this is what I would call walking it out. The title of this lesson is Walking It Out. We have walking it out points every week. And what do you do with walking it out? Every day we walk it out. We walk something out. On a daily basis, we are walking something out. And so see, when we begin to have this awareness through this conscious contact with God, we begin to realize that I'm engaging with God, I'm examining myself, and I'm equipping others. And see, that whole equipping other things, I mean, we've talked about that. through this whole series of community. And so I would have to challenge us, where is our community? I mean, where are the people that we're dealing with? And see, we may be, another way intertwined, we may be equipping other people and having a conversation with other people, but probably in the midst of that conversation, we may be silently praying like, God, what am I going to say here? I have no idea what to say to this person. Well, what is that? Engaging with God. Engaging with God. We may be in the middle of equipping other people and we're engaging with God because we don't know what to say. Or we may be in the process of talking to somebody else, equipping them, and then all of a sudden, one of these things where we had been examining ourselves, it's like, there's an example that you could tell us. You see, they're all intertwined together, and I really believe that this is our daily life with walking with God. And so that's what the whole thing looks like. And so see, my challenge is this, as we leave here, as we complete this 12-step study, that this does not just become I completed the 12-step study and my workbook is in there, or I listened to all the CDs, or all those different things, but that we're left with there's hope that our world, our life will change if we continue to engage with God, examine ourselves, and equip others. This is a lifestyle. And I would remind us again, just like the writers of the Big Book said, that, this is something that we made a commitment to do. Early on, we made a commitment that I am going to give my whole life for God to lead me. I'm all in. I'm going to follow Jesus. He's my new director of my life. I tried it and it didn't work. And so see, we decided early on that we would go to whatever lengths we wanted to do to be free from our struggle. And so this is our, not formula to live by, but this is things that will play out in our life as we continue on this journey of engaging with God. If you want to say that, well, my deal with the 12 steps is never over, from this standpoint, that would be true. We should always be engaging with God. He's a good God. He loves us. He has our best interests in mind. He will teach us everything that we need to know. And so then through that, we learn to examine ourselves. And through that, we learn to help equip others, the whole community thing that we're talking about. So what are we doing? Let's say it. Examine myself. Engage with God. Equip others. Examine, engage, equip. And see, I believe if we do that we're going to find that our whole life has changed, that our community around us have changed. People are going to say, well, what's going on there? And then what happens? We get to help equip them to find that same freedom. And so a couple just things here to challenge us as we wrap this up. Freedom points, I put this one thing in there. It was my favorite verse. It was page 704, Psalm 37:4 in the Life Recovery Bible. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire. See, this psalmist wrote this. He had this same idea right there in that one statement. Take delight in the Lord. Engage with God, and He will give you the desires of your heart. And so what do we do with this? How do we carry this? How do we leave here? My challenge is this. If you can commit to for 7 days to just try this. Don't make a formula out of it. Just have an awareness. And maybe, that as you go through the day, you'll be like, that was something I was doing to examine myself. I was really engaging with God there. I said, God, would you help me in that situation? That's engaging with God. And then you run into somebody and they're like, man, I'm on my last leg here. And you're like, well, let me tell you a story. That's equipping others. And so see, don't make a formula out of this, but think about this whole improving our conscious contact with God. Examine ourselves, engage with God, and equip others. And so I want to give you something before you leave. We got these cards printed up. We're going to have them at the back. I didn't want to give them to you early because then you wouldn't pay attention to what I was talking about. But it's a really nice design. It says daily walk, examine myself, engage with God, equip others. And you can take these home and put it on your refrigerator. If you really, really are serious about doing this, take 2 or 3. Put one in your book, in your Bible, or in your car. But like I said, just as reminders to try this for a week. If you listen to this and you want to know how you can get one of these, then either call us or email us or go online and we'll put a PDF on there and you can download one. But put that on your mirror or whatever. But that's my challenge is for 7 days. Try this. Let's just try this. And it'll make a difference in your life as we engage with God, we examine ourselves, and we equip others. And so that concludes this teaching of the 12-step series, and I certainly hope that you have enjoyed it. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope, my prayer is that God would just richly pour himself out to us for our commitment to try to learn more about him and about ourselves as we've journeyed through these steps. And so let me pray for us. God, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you that you sort of revealed these ideas to a lot of people, and then through a lot of different forms, Lord, that people are beginning to find freedom from their struggles and addiction just by having, some people that have been there talk about it and say there's hope and you can get through this. And then we introduce the ideas of how, you're the true healer and you truly do heal us and you meet our needs and you never leave us, you never forsake us. And if we commit ourselves, Lord, if we engage with you, Lord, that you will help us to be free from all these different things, and you'll give us this life that we'll be able to live, now without these kind of struggles, because you promised us freedom. And so we love you so much, and we thank you for loving us. In the name of Jesus, amen.